Welcome to the movement part of our series in this exercise course. Before we start, I wanted to start by explaining two concepts to you. The first is why you want to move the arm in a laying down and side position, and the second is why you always want to start with the shoulder. Having an individual lay on their side to move the arm is actually incredibly useful in that you have a lot of access to the shoulder and the arm, and it's a safe position for the person who's lying down. I typically like to do this maybe first thing in the morning or maybe right before you go to bed when you're in your bed. So it's something incredibly easy to do. It also gives me, like I said, plenty of access to her scapula, her shoulder, her arm, and I can sit or stand, and so it's easier on the caregiver. So the second thing I wanted to go over before starting the movement exercises is why you start with the shoulder. So typically in stroke rehab, we see certain patterns of recovery. And all that means is that we tend to see certain parts of the arm come back first and certain parts of the arm come back last. And the reason that's important to understand is if you start to see the first part move, you start to get a little hope and you start to be able to figure out what exercises you need to do. So the patterns are pretty simple. The first one is top before bottom. So typically you tend to see someone be able to shrug a shoulder or move things at the top of the arm before they're ever able to do movements on the bottom of the arm, like close their hand. The second pattern of recovery is we tend to see in before out. So I may see a person be able to like pull their arm in this type of motion, or if like I'm sitting, I may see this. So I'm coming in towards my body before I ever see someone be able to take their arms and push them outwards. And the last pattern of recovery that's good to note is close before open. I'm going to typically see someone be able to move their fingers in a closed position, so they're going to start to do this before they ever start to open it. So here is movement one for the scapula or the shoulder blade, which is right back here. I like to have the person laying on their side, and I like to sit while I'm doing this. You're going to take your one hand and you're going to slip it under their weak arm. This gives you full control of that arm without having to do too much work. And then I'm going to have an open palm right on that scapula, because this is what I'm trying to move, or the shoulder blade. This hand I just have in the front. So the first exercise is up and down. So you're going to push up and you're going to pull down. And you're going to push up and you're going to pull down. This tends to feel really good for the person who's had a stroke, because more often than not, a lot of people don't pay attention to the shoulder and move it at all. So now let me show you this in real time. Just going to pull down, push up, pull down, push up, pull down, and push up. Movement two for the scapula or shoulder blade is in and out. So I'm really focusing on using my palm for this. It's the exact same position. Your hand's open on their shoulder blade or scapula. The other one's in front. But really, I'm going to put pressure on my palm. I'm going to push her back to get a nice stretch, and forward, and back, and forward. So let me do this a couple times so you can see it in real time. Forward, back, forward. You can always stay in a position for a second and hold it for a little bit of a deeper stretch. Remember, the more input you give the shoulder, the more output you're going to get. The third and final movement I would recommend for the shoulder and scapula is circumduction, or just going in a circle. You can go in either direction. So you're just going to, again, take your open palm hands, place it on the back of the shoulder blade in the front of the shoulder, and you're just going to move in a circle. Try to envision a clock is what I like to do, and I try to hit every single number. So you can go backwards and you can move forwards. So in real time, it looks something like this. Just circle. I can hold a stretch at any point. You can hold it. Kind of encompasses all of the different movements. Let's move on to shoulder movement. I have 3 recommended exercises I would do for the shoulder. And again, we're talking about this part of the body right here. Again, do this laying down, do this multiple times a day, and do as many repetitions as you can. You will hear me say that. You don't have to count. The more you do, the better. So let's get started. Movement number 1 for the shoulder, we're going to talk about from center to front. So when you do this exercise, I would always recommend you lock out the elbow and you support the other hand on the wrist. The reason being, if I do not lock out the elbow and I allow it to bend, I'm not isolating movement in the shoulder. And the goal for this exercise is to isolate movement in the shoulder to, again, remind the brain, hey brain, this is how my shoulder is supposed to be moving. So I like to do this standing rather than sitting. So one hand I'm locking this elbow out, and the second one I'm supporting the wrist. I like to stand at the top of the person, more towards their head. So we're going to go from center, and then I use my body where they kind of touch here, and I go back. And you can see all this nice movement is happening right in the shoulder, just as if though you were reaching for something. If you were sitting, you need this motion. So real time, I would just do this, again, as many times as you can. And that's the first one, center to forward. The second exercise for the shoulder is center back. You're going to have your hands in the same spot, supporting the wrist and locking out the elbow. I like to put my knee on the bed and lean into this a little bit. You're going to come back and come forward. A lot of people are scared to move the arm in a backward position, but if you think about it, when I'm moving in my daily life, my shoulder moves in all different positions, up, down, forward, back. So this is why this is important. So again, in real time, supporting the wrist, locking out the elbow. I'm going to go back and center, back and center, back and center. The third and final exercise that I would recommend for the shoulder is up and down. So hand on the wrist, hand locking out the elbow, and you're going to move up and you're going to move down. You're going to stay in alignment with their hip or the side. And so this is it in a little bit more real, faster time. You can hold it if it feels good to stretch up here, but you're just going to keep going up and down and up and down. Moving on to the elbow. There are 2 exercises that I would recommend when moving the elbow in a side lying position. So let's get started. Exercise number 1 for the elbow. I like to, again, stay standing and maybe put my knee in the bed and lean into it a little bit, but I put my hands in a slightly different position than when I'm moving the shoulder. So my one hand is going to be a stabilizer. I want to glue the top of the arm down next to the side of the person's body. And again, the same principle applies. When I'm moving the elbow, I don't want to move the shoulder because I want to isolate movement to the elbow to get the brain to signal and go, oh yeah, that's how my elbow is supposed to be moving. So for exercise number 1, you're going to take your first hand and kind of glue the person's top of the arm down, and your second hand is going to support the wrist. So for this exercise, it's called up and down. You're going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. Do this as many times as you can, as many times a day. Extremely helpful exercise to get that elbow moving again. Exercise number 2 for the elbow. For this exercise, again, your one hand is going to hold the top of the arm down next to the person's side. The second one is going to be on the wrist, and you're going to bend the elbow. This is a subtle movement, and it's working a lot of the scapula, but it's a movement from the elbow, and it's extremely important to do to gain function back in the arm. It's also something that a lot of people forget to do. So I have this forearm glued, the top of the arm glued down. I'm going to slightly pull back, just slight, and come in. So we call this in and out. So out, in, in. I'm not going very far out, but can you feel a little bit of a stretch? You can feel a slight stretch. You don't have to go far out. You're probably not going to go farther out than actually what's in line with their side, but she can feel the stretch and in and out and in. Let's move on to wrist and finger exercises and movement. And again, do this as many times a day as you can. You can actually do these easily sitting just as much as you can on your side. But for the purpose of this course, I'll show you on your side all the different motions you want to do with the wrist and the fingers. Exercise number 1 for the wrist. I like to do this standing up with the person on their side. I like to take my one stabilizing hand and stabilize the upper arm against the side. Again, a reoccurring pattern here is when you want to work on a specific joint in the shoulder, elbow, hand, you want to lock the other joints out so they can't help. That way, we're reminding the brain this is how the wrist and the fingers are supposed to be moving, and it's going to shoot a signal up, and then the signal is going to get shot down. So, for the first exercise, this is called back and forward, or up and down. You're going to bend the wrist back slightly and let it come down to the side. Bend it back and let it come down to the side. You can do a gentle stretch when you get to the top. I have an open palm hand on this side. This tends to feel really good. If the person has a painful wrist and it's tight, this is a really nice stretch. Just go as far as the person can tolerate and then come back down to their side. Exercise number 2 for the wrist. You're still going to use your one hand as a stabilizer to glue the upper part of the arm down next to the side. And you're going to take your other arm and we're going to move the wrist in a circle or circumduction. So again, nice and easy. You're just going to move it in a circle. You can go one direction, you can go the other direction. You really can't do it wrong. The third exercise I like to do with the wrist is side to side. So you're going to take the wrist and you're going to move it one towards the pinky and then in towards the thumb, towards the pinky, in towards the thumb, and you're going to feel a stretch along this side, which is a great muscle and tendon to stretch to make sure you loosen up the wrist and remind it how it's supposed to be moving, which is all different directions. There are 2 finger exercises that I would go through in a side lying position. First I would do is take the person's arm and move it to its side so the thumb is facing up. You have more access to the hand that way. Then the first exercise I would do is, again, I'm supporting that wrist and gluing it against the side, and I'm just going to close and open the fingers to remind the hand and that brain-body connection how the fingers are supposed to close and open. I also like to do a stretch right here and kind of hold that position in, but you're going to close and open, close and open, close and open. The last exercise I would do for the fingers involves the thumb. Our thumb moves in all different directions, so you want to do that when you're moving it. Again, I put her arm instead of her palm flat on her side, I moved it so her thumb is up, so I have full access, and I'm supporting the wrist with my other hand. And I'm just going to take, and you can move the thumb in a circular position. Sometimes I like to hold down at the joint and give input so the brain remembers that the joint is here and is supposed to be moving. You can do circles, you can do in, you can do out, and then you can do up and you can do down. You can't really move the thumb wrong, just move it.